geographical thought. We're trying to cover those topics in quick, short summaries, give you all the important, relevant words, so that you are able to make a foundation of the important concepts. So these videos will help you revise and see if you can relate it with the class notes that you have or whatever jottings you must have made. Okay, so a quick summary. We're discussing the behavioral revolution. Behavioral revolution, otherwise also called as the critical revolution. So when I use the word critical, we are referring to being critical of the extreme quantification of the QR. And when I say behavioral, we're trying to bring in some studies and some aspects about studying how behavior of individuals is an important part of studying the man-environment relationship. Now, what was the main, basis of development of this school of thought? The main basis was that in QR, man was ignored. In the phase of quantification with extreme objective or extreme quantification and focus on extreme positivism, man was ignored. And in the process, geography got dehumanized. In the process, the laws that we made were normative laws, not really reflecting the real life conditions or aspects of man-environment relationship. So the behavioral revolution was primarily focused in getting man back into geography. Man with all his perceptions, man with all his subjective interpretations, and man now becomes integral to geographical studies. And in doing this, behavioral revolution is trying to humanize geography in that sense. Now, behavioral revolution or critical revolution has two branches in which the backlash developed. One was the behavioral geography. You must be very careful to differentiate behavioral revolution from behavioral geography, because behavioral revolution also includes humanistic geography, which was actually an antithetical of behavioral geography. These two are almost at loggerheads, extreme loggerheads, whereas humanistic is part of the behavioral backlash. Now, the central focus was to get back man. And what about man? It was about getting geography to accept and include perception and cognition elements in the study of man and environment. That the environment that we are studying is not necessarily the real physical world. The world that we are studying is not necessarily the real physical objective world. It is a world which is perceived by the observer and perceived by the person who is participating in some activity with the world. So, in trying to get back perception and cognition, both these approaches were inspired by behavioral and cognitive sciences. So, we're talking about psychology here. In the QR, the influence was economics. In QR, the influence was mathematics and statistics. Here, the influence is psychology. And eventually, of course, it moves on towards extreme philosophy also under humanistic approach. Now, the proponents of behavioral geography were people like Walpert. And Walpert's ideas were largely the consequence of the works of Herbert Simon. Now, Herbert Simon is not a geographer, he is actually an economist. And he gave the concept of man as a satisficer. He gave the concept of man as rational, but rational only as long as he's trying to satisfy according to his expectations. So not that extreme positivism. So he's talking in that sense. So Walpert is inspired by this, and we do have the works of Gilbert and the rest, and White also talks about the impact and perception of floods and hazards. Okay, so these were the main proponents. And a lot of theories were developed around economic and rational man. Economic rational man, but remember, this rationality is what is called as bounded rationality. The concept of economic rational man also fits into QR. But in QR, this concept is more extreme. In behavioral geography, it's more about economic man, but economics not being the sole aspect. It's about economics as perceived by the individual. So that's why we use a term called as bounded rationality. So we had a man called as Cates, who lists down what are the features of a person who has bounded rationality operating for him. Okay, how does man take decisions is what Cates talked about. K-A-T-E-S, Cates. So the concept of economic rationality, but in a very modified form, not in the conventional quantitative revolution model. So man is a satisfier. And behavioral geography definitely talked about making generalizations. But the generalizations of behavioral geography were more around the perceived world, and generalizations not about the patterns. I repeat, QR was interested in making generalizations on patterns of phenomena and events, whereas behavioral geography is trying to make generalizations on how people take decisions. That creates the patterns in man-environment relationship. So that's how behavioral geography in some way is an extension of QR, but yet different from QR. Whereas if you compare humanistic is entirely counter of behavioral geography. It's antithetical of behavioral geography and QR. So many of them consider that humanistic school is the actual significant extreme backlash. And who have contributed? We have people like Harris, okay, who talks about the role of humanistic approach. We have Goelka, who is inspired by Harris. We have Kirk. Kirk talks about how there is no world independent of the perceived world. Okay, though we classify a phenomenal world and a perceived world, but Kirk says in geography, what does not enter the perceived world is not a part of the phenomenal world either. In a sense, Kirk is asserting that there is no world beyond the perceived world. And man is so unique and his perception so unique, humanistic says it's impossible to interpret objectively and generalize. It's impossible to analyze. The very important point. Okay, quantitative revolution and behavioral geography were appreciating geography as analytical sciences, analysis of looking into cause-effect relationship, analysis of searching for reasons and then developing models around them. Whereas humanistic was entirely against the analytical approach. For humanistic, the cause is so unique, it is so entrenched into man and his mind, it's impossible that we can have analysis or we can conclude into some cause-effect relationship. So humanistic approach is about appreciation of diversity of perception and not analysis of the why of the phenomena. And it's against the idea of making laws. It's against the idea of any form of generalization. It's against any form of quantification. So if you can relate this, maybe some other video will explain that to you, that starting 1930s, 40s and right through 70s and 80s, there was two schools of thought emerging which kind of influence geography. One school of thought that influences geography is the modernism. Modernism, of course, it has its roots in what's called as the Enlightenment project in Europe. But modernism is about mathematics, objective scientific inquiry. Okay, modernism is about rationality, and this rationality ultimately became the basis of the Industrial Revolution and the scientific approach. Whereas the backlash against modernism was postmodernism, which tries to appreciate diversity in all its forms. Postmodernism is against scientific objectivity. It's against scientific rationality, which is often deprived of the humanistic uniqueness in perception and cognition. So humanistic geography in many ways is symbolic of, or kind of captures the essence of postmodernism. And there are many forms in which this postmodernism grows. Postmodernism was also in radical geography. Postmodernism became the basis of a revival of Marxist approach in a different way. So if you understand humanistic, at least at this stage, know that this was one of the important pillars on which postmodernist geography developed. So that's more or less a quick summary of what the two schools of thoughts are, and maybe in some of the later videos we'll take up how humanistic geography had many sub-schools within it. We have idealism in this, we have phenomenology, we have existentialism, and how all of this develops geography in a very abstract way. So as of now, I hope you appreciate difference between behavioral geography and the school of humanistic geography. You can pause the screen, take down some notes, and I'm sure you'll get a hang of the concept to help you revise. Thank you.